Guys, we finally have the new On the Run Speed White correction pen fluid here on site today for a tagging test / formula test and full review. I cannot wait to see what this stuff is like because I keep hearing great things from literally everybody about it. I did an unboxing where I showed this, link in the corner to that, and you guys just all had great stuff to say about this Speed White ink. I'm sure many of you guys are already down in the comments leaving some awesome comments about how much you seem to love this stuff. So I'll tell you guys what we're going to do. Now, I don't use any like fancy correction pens. You guys know me, I'm a cheap person. So today what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tell you the most important info that graffiti writers are going to want to know about this Speed White correction pen fluid here. And then we're going to be heading over to our testing area to test out the opacity of this beautiful white liquid, the consistency of it, and the viscosity or the drippability, as we say here on the channel, of course, compared to something like my go-to correction pen here, just a normal Bic whiteout pen. Like I said, I'm cheap, so this is what I use, but hey, if it works, it works. And once we get a feel for the differences between this Speed White correction pen fluid and a normal generic sort of fluid that comes in a Bic pen like this, that's when the real fun is gonna start, guys, because I want to take this opportunity to take some of this Speed White correction pen fluid and mix it with some other inks. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna mix those two inks together, do a few tags, and see how the two inks interact with each other, what kind of cool effects you can get using it like that in a correction pen. Now, I'll get to what's in this ink a little bit later on because it is sort of a concoction that I have made a little bit, but I'll get to that later. For now, let's get into what really is important about this Speed White correction fluid. So this OTR Speed White correction pen fluid is an ink. It's a heavily pigmented ink, but it is still an ink, to be clear. And the info on the bottle states that it is simply a solvent-based ink. Although my dude Bishan Kiefen, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, over in Germany, shout out to all my German viewers on the channel, of course, lots of support from Germany, which I appreciate immensely, but he says this stuff came out a couple months ago there, and that does sort of make sense with how usually supply chains work. Paints and inks usually take a little while to get across supply chains and across the different continents, especially when they do have more serious chemicals in them. But Bishan Kiefen pointed out that he thinks this is a xylene base solvent, and although it doesn't specifically say that on the bottle anywhere, one whiff of this stuff does tell you that indeed there probably is some xylene going on in there. It smells quite xylene-ish to me, and that is of course great for a permanence aspect of it. It also smells great, I will add, but I think Bishan Kiefen is right on the money with his comment there about this being a xylene-based solvent. Speaking of the bottle size though, yes, this does come in a 100 milliliter PET bottle, which is basically just a bit of a less of a rigid plastic. It's funny because these bottles that this come in are literally less rigid than the Superflow 008 and 009 marker that just came out from On the Run, so I don't know why they would use good plastic for a bottle and bad plastic for an actual squeeze mop. Go ask them, maybe. The review of those is in the corner as well, or in the description. And you may be thinking 100 milliliter bottles, that's pretty small, and yes, it is, but you have to remember also, using these in a correction pen type thing, the 100 milliliters goes a longer way than 100 milliliters would in any kind of mop, of course. And the pricing of this product does reflect that it is in 100 milliliter bottles. It's only about $7.5 US per bottle, so it's still at the upper end of the pricing, but not bad for what I'm hoping we're getting here. That remains to be seen in our formula test, of course, though. The bottle emphasizes here that it is high quality solvent-based correction pen, super permanent, matte, quick drying, and most of all, opaque. And funnily enough, that is literally all the bottle says. Like, there's not much else on here. I guess that's the bottle trying to tell us to stop messing around in here, get the hell over to our testing area and test this out. Let's do that. Welcome to the testing area, everyone. As I usually say, if this is your first time joining us, where all the magic happens, an extra welcome to you. First thing is first, I buffed out a nice, fairly smooth wood surface behind me here. It works well enough for this type of thing especially. So first, let's lay down some tags just with the normal Bic correction pen with the generic formula that you get in a Bic correction pen. We're gonna lay down some tags of subscribers' names who have asked me for a hit off in a video. And then after that, we're gonna fill up this reservoir, which I've already cleaned out with Speed White so that there's no mixing of the generic formula with the Speed White formula, and then we'll get some tags up with the Speed White formula, of course, and compare the generic formula and the Speed White for the opacity, see if there's that extra opacity boost in there that we're hoping to get, and we'll see if there's any differences in viscosity, dripability between the two. I have a feeling this one's going to be a much nicer formula to work with. It really should be. But anyway, after we compare these two formulae, the Speed White and the normal generic, we'll break out the ink and add that to the correction pen, do some tags, see what effects we can get, and hey, after that, I thought we could even maybe have some fun and do some Speed White correction pen fluid times the Molotov Dripstick and see where that gets us. Just as a bit of a bonus pro tip with Sciz here, if you're like me and you like using these nice cheap Bic pens and you do eventually want to refill them, I think it's worth pointing out that you actually screw them rightwards to unscrew them, clockwise to unscrew, which is the opposite of most things. Something else is, due to the nature of the body of these correction pens and it being sort of flexible, sometimes a bit of this fluid does leak into the threading, and that can cause some stickiness when you're trying to unscrew it rightward. In that case, pliers are your friend. I like to just use vice grips. That's a bit of an overkill, but hey, it works every time. Something cool too, these correction pens, they come with this sort of cylinder in them. It's just a metal cylinder, and that's the mixing ball in them. Something you don't see every day for yourself that I wanted to include. First things first, I want to give a shout out to Hitch. A regular viewer, Snotman, asked if I could hit off Hitch. It's a birthday hit off. I'm about a month late for this, so I apologize. Happy belated birthday though, Hitch. So we're starting off with the generic formula here, just to be clear. And just a bit about the correction pen itself. I know there are plenty of different correction pens out there, from the press and go ones to the Pentel ones to a bunch of others. To each their own. Correction pens are so cheap no matter the brand, I don't often look into them too much. But one thing I will say is that because they are so cheap, maybe try a few out and evaluate them by body type and by which body style is the nicest to write with for you specifically, because they do vary by body type quite a bit, especially between the Pentel one, the press and go, and even these normal Bic pens. Also, something specifically with the Bic pen here is its metal ball. The steel tip is pretty small, especially compared to a couple of the other more graffiti oriented branded ones, which people prefer probably a little bit of a bigger one. I don't know, maybe let me know in the comments if you prefer a bit of a bigger rollerball on your correction pens or not. So you're seeing, of course, the generic formula tags here. I'm gonna wait to comment on how the formula acts until we've got something to compare it next to. So let's fill this up with the Speed White solvent-based correction pen fluid and see what this Speed White is all about. Yeah, even just pouring this stuff, you can tell it's a real sticky formula, very like classic correction pen type formula. So let's see what we're dealing with here. Yeah, I can already tell this is a beautiful, thick formula. Oh, look at that. Look at that, beautiful. So to be honest, you don't really see too much difference between the opacity of the generic formula and the Speed White itself, although where you do start to see that opacity difference and the consistency difference is when you're trying to put down very thick lines, get a few drips. That's when you do get these nice drips that are a little bit three-dimensional because of that nice, thick, consistent formula. That's where it's sort of one-upping the more generic formula. For sure, it's just got that nice stickiness to it, that classic correction pen stickiness. So if you're looking for something that's just a little bit more three-dimensional, that gives you that nice thick three-dimensional sort of drippage, then this Speed White is the right stuff. And if you do want to look at which one is a more true white, I do have to say the trueness of the white, there's not much difference in it. When you do put down some nice thick lines with the Speed White, they hold up pretty true, I would say. They're similar to the point where there's no real visible difference in the actual trueness of each white. But now that we've seen that, let's look at the possibilities of this Speed White and what it means for mixing with some other inks and having some fun like that, because I know that's what you're all waiting for. Let's get to that. So that's my cue to bring in this flow pen ink here. Full disclosure, this flow pen ink is a little bit funky. It's not just flow pen ink anymore. This bottle has become a bit of a dumping ground for most of my sort of leftover paints and stuff. So it is an ink, but it's a little bit pigmented with different stuff as well, as you can see at the bottom. It's definitely got some cloudiness to it from that pigment. Now, I was just gonna do this on like a non-painted wood so it could seep in real nice, but look at this beautiful effect. Oh, we're gonna do a bit on here and then take a look at what it does on a non-painted wood. Baka and Fledgy are homies. They wanted a hit off. Let's give each of them a hit off. That's incredible. I love this mix. In case you guys are wondering how much of the ink I put in here, I'd say only probably about 7/8 of the Speed White and maybe an 1/8 of the actual flow pen ink. So as you can see with this ink mixing here, it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous way to mix the inks. And this is where the extra bit of thickness and consistency and opacity is really coming in handy, so that the ink that you mix it with gives it a nice sort of viscosity rather than something being way too drippy for a correction pen or something like that. And I mean, obviously the effects you're getting here when it seeps into a surface a little bit, there isn't that separation because they probably are very similar inks, but they work really well together. Just want to give a quick shout out here to Deus. Happy, well, belated birthday, but happy birthday to Deus. Oh, that one was crap. Let's do it again. Happy belated one, my guy. I'm just loving how you can mix a normal sort of ink with a very opaque pigmented correction pen ink or fluid, and you just have this beautiful effect. You can create any kind of color like that depending on what ink you have. So personally, I feel like this Speed White correction pen fluid is just begging to be tried out in something with a thicker steel tip like this Molotov Rollerball. Not that you're necessarily supposed to do that, and I'll explain why a little bit later. I've never felt too comfortable with these Molotov Rollerball dripsticks, but let's do this anyway. And after that, I want to tell you guys something that everyone needs to know before they pick up one of these Speed White correction pen fluid bottles. It is something that everyone legitimately needs to know about this, but let's see what this is all about first. Look at how white that is. Isn't that gorgeous? I hope this works. Okay, well that rollerball worked horrendously. I apologize for that. I think it's more just because the rollerball dripstick I have is sort of destroyed, but it did sort of outline actually something a little bit good. It did show just how opaque and white and the true nature of the white of this formula. So you can see that very clearly from the tags with a bit of a bigger rollerball, even though it didn't roll very smoothly at least. But there is one thing that I need to tell you guys before you buy this stuff, because it actually is important depending on what you're going to be using it for. So the thing that everyone needs to know about this beautiful Speed White correction pen fluid is that, number one, you cannot use this in any kind of chisel tip or pump action marker of any kind. That's probably pretty obvious to most of you, but it's always the first time for someone out there hearing that. But what might be a little bit less obvious is that you actually cannot use this stuff in a mop either. Although it flows fine through a mop, or it should for quite a while at least, what you don't want to be doing is leaving it in a mop, because due to the solvent, the nature of the solvent in this, and just because most solvents do this, it'll actually evaporate out of the mop. Even if the mop is capped, that's just sort of how it works. So you can't really use it long term in a mop either. They stop it from evaporating when it comes in these by putting these nice sort of little foam parts at the top to seal it nicely for you. That's what that's for. So it actually does serve a very important purpose. So what I'm saying here is you actually are sort of restricted to using it in correction pens. That's why it's specifically a correction pen fluid. They make that very clear on the labeling, the marketing, all that jazz. I know there are tons of you out there who are excited to get your hands on this ink, and many of you that already have. So whichever side of that conversation you're on, drop a comment telling everyone what correction pen you're running this ink in, if you've used it, or what correction pen you just use on a normal basis with or without the Speed White in it. I only tested out one kind of ink mixing here with the mostly flow pen ink mixed with the Speed White, but there are tons of combinations combinations out there, of course. If you have done any of that fun stuff, hey, leave a comment. That's the kind of creativity that we all love to try out with our formulate mixing stuff. The more knowledge we can share with each other, the more knowledge we all have, and the more fun we're all gonna have, of course. You can check out a playlist of some of my best graffiti reviews on screen now, and if you're curious, check out some of the other reviews we have here on the channel. I'll see you in one of those videos shortly. Until then, peace.